gonna give nobody none of my jelly rolls. I wouldn't give you a piece of this cake to save your soul. My mom told me today, before she went away, to be a good boy, she'd bring me a toy. I'm my mama's pride and joy. Now there ain't no use for you to keep on hanging round. I love you, but I've got to let you down.
Hello everyone and welcome to Castálio Podcast. I'm your host, Augie Maciel, speaking from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
I'm Eliezer, speaking from Pouso Alegre, Minas Gerais.
And this is Bruno, speaking from Guarulhos, Brazil, São Paulo.
Our guest for today is the creator of Python Requests, HTTP for Humans. He currently works at Heroku with a pretty cool title, PythonOverLord. We're going to talk a little bit about that. He has an amazing collection of pictures on his Instagram feed. He hosts his own podcast called Import This. He wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to Python, which is a Python best practices guidebook, which coincidentally was just published recently by O'Reilly in September. And all proceeds from sales are being donated directly to the Django Girls Foundation, which is pretty awesome. And he's behind many other interesting projects, which can be seen by visiting his GitHub profile page. It is with a great pleasure that I welcome Kenneth Reitz to our podcast.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you, and I just want to let people listen to this episode that Kenneth is at a meetup right now, and he was very kind to take a little bit of his time to talk to us. So I guess I'm just going to jump right into it and start asking you some of the things that the three of us were really curious to know. And is
sounds good.
We would like to know, Kenneth, how did you get started programming?
Ooh, how did I get started programming? Well, when I was a little kid, I was always fascinated by computers, and I always wanted to spend as much time as possible on them. And my dad was a programmer, so he introduced me to Linux at a very young age, and I always inherited really old computers. So I was born in '88, and my first computer that was my own was an IBM XT, which is from I think the mid '80s. And I used that thing for 2 years full time as my computer. It's the one with the turbo button on it, you know. And it ran DOS. I got it to run DOS 6, but it came with DOS 4, so it didn't even have the edit command. And it had BASIC, and I found a BASIC book. My aunt used my grand aunt or somebody. She's related to me. I think she's technically my grand uncle, or hang on, not my uncle. She's an extended relative. And she used to send us all kinds of books when I was kids, and when we were kids, and me and my siblings. And one of them was learning how to program, teaching yourself how to program for kids. And it was from the 70s, and it was all BASIC. And so I learned how to do basic programming with that, with GW Basic and then Q Basic. And then my dad gave me Turbo Borderland C and C++, because he had a copy, and I installed that on my Windows 95 computer when I had one eventually, and I learned Turbo Pascal and C, and I was only doing really basic stuff like writing command line games, text adventure games, and little things that pretend that you're in the Matrix and stuff like that. Things that would play through this PC speaker. I was just experimenting around, but that's how I got started.
And do you remember what your first program was? Very first one?
My first big one was called Splashware, and it's still on the internet. I'll send you the link to it later, because the website is still up for it. And it was I wanted to make my own shareware package, and you open it up, and it had all these crazy colors that would go all over the screen, and it had a menu, and it lets you pick from a Splash shell, and that was a DOS shell that was blue. It changed the background color for DOS to blue. And I thought that was and it let you choose your own prompt, which was kind of cool. And then it had a game built into it, and it had a theme song, and a couple other things. And that was my big package that I made. And it was a bunch of executables that were all linked together. And I don't have the source code for it, unfortunately, but I do have the executables. They are online.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and actually you can run it on archive.org right now. I have it on archive.org. If you search for Kenneth Reitz on there, there's you can run it in the web browser through DOSBox. So it's pretty cool to see my first program up on there.
That's a really cool thing. Also,
I think I was in 6th grade when I wrote that, so I was probably the age of 11 or 12.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I was a bit of a nerd.
Yeah, I think we all were, man.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And you started programming. So, how did you get started to Python?
I see. I went to college for a year and then I dropped out, which was one of the best decisions I ever made. But I did decide to go to school because I don't learn well in a classroom environment. I'm a self-teacher. They call it. It's called an autodidact is the official term. It just basically means I'm best at teaching myself how to do things. And the course they offer, I decided I wanted to do computer science as my major. I was really torn between music and photography and being a missionary or being a social worker. Those are all different options I had in my head. And I decided that if I was a programmer, I could do all those things on the side anyway. So I chose to major in computer science. And luckily, the school that I went to, I had learned all those programming languages I mentioned before, at a rudimentary level. I didn't really understand how to actually program, though. So I took the first course for CS, was CS 112, and it was a Python class. And I went to about half the classes, and I got really stuck as soon as they started talking about classes, like Python classes. And I stopped showing up to class after that. And I just got so stuck on it, and it bothered me. And I loved everything about Python so far. It was my favorite language out of everything I had used. I really resonated really deeply with me. And I just kind of sat by myself, and I was doing a bunch of Linux stuff and teaching myself how to program, not going to class. And then one day I just figured it out, and it all made sense to me suddenly. And I knew Python, and it all made sense. And that's how I taught myself Python.
Oh, very, very nice.
Yeah, it was a good process, and it really was. There was just a moment where it all kind of clicked, and then I started I wanted to make my own class, where it was a dollar. You would print it. It would be and it would have the dollar sign and then the .00, for dollars, and it would have the cents, and it would be a float in the background. And I had to figure out how to do that with all the magic methods. And so I just instant messaged my teacher, and I'm like, how do I do this? And he showed me the documentation, and I just kind of went from there, and I learned how all of the object model in Python works, and I just kind of flew off from there, and I just started writing classes for everything. And that's really all I needed, was to just get over that little hump.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I just get it. I just fall in love with Python for the same reason. I have read a book about Lua programming, Lua programming language, and then when I saw Python data model, I just felt in love with Python especially because of that. Yeah,
it's a little bit better than tables, right?
Yeah, a little, very, very better. Yeah, so we see that you are very active on Python, and you have a lot of Python projects. You have talked on many Python conferences, but I want to know if you are involved in any kind of way with other communities. Are you using another languages and participating on another language or technology events?
I've spoken at a couple polyglot conferences, and I used to be really involved early in my career. Before I loved Python, and it was my hobby. I did a lot of PHP and WordPress development, and for a short little while, I was doing C# development. That was my first tech job, was doing C# development. But PHP was the one where I started doing open source, and I would write my own WordPress plugins and stuff like that. But today, I've spoken at a few polyglot conferences. And I kind of do generic API-driven development talks and stuff like that. Nothing really too specific, and to Python. And I use Bash a lot in my job, at Heroku. I'm a part of the languages team, so I sit and I get to collaborate with other language owners. So there's a language owner for Python, that's what I am, and there's one for Ruby. There's two for Ruby. There's one for Go. There's one for Java. There's one for Node. I think that's everybody. I might be missing somebody, but we all collaborate, and so I get to get a lot of good insight into the different packaging tools and the different problems that those ecosystems have. So I'm involved at the Heroku level with those communities, but I don't really contribute back or am involved with them, if that makes sense. So I try to take the things that I learned from those communities and bring them into Python, because Python is really the only one I care about.
Very nice. Thanks a lot for carrying.
You're welcome. I do really enjoy writing Bash. Bash is fun because it's so hard and it's so it's kind of archaic. It feels like programming to me because Python is so easy to write, and Bash is sometimes you have to really figure things out with Bash, which I really enjoy. But that's the only thing that I ever work on. I don't actively use any other programming languages really, other than HTML and CSS and stuff like that.
That's a good segue into the next question that I have for you, which is, early when I introduced the podcast, I mentioned that you have a really cool title, which is a PythonLord at Heroku.
PythonOverLord, yes.
Overlord, cool. And the one thing that I noticed is this: I do follow you on Instagram.
Uh-huh.
And I do know about a lot of the things, maybe not all of them, but I do know about a lot of the projects that you either kickstarted or support. And I would like to know a couple of things. So the questions I have for you: what do you do as a Python overlord, and how do you find the time to tackle and maintain so many different projects and take so many cool pictures at the same time?
Well, so as the Python overlord, I'm responsible for, officially the title is I'm the language owner of Python, or the product owner of Python, or my official title within Salesforce, which is Heroku's parent organization, is senior member of technical staff. And my job is I'm responsible for everything Python related at Heroku, basically. So when you do git push Heroku master, all the output that you see and all the things that install your requirements, and making sure that the latest version of Python is available and that you can select from different versions of Python. I'm responsible for all the infrastructure behind that. I'm responsible for all the documentation around Python, the getting started guides. There's documentation on how to do WebSockets for each language. So there's a WebSockets document on the Dev Center on Heroku for Python, and there's a demo app, so I maintain that. And when I went to go do that, there wasn't a good way to do WebSockets in Flask, so I actually ended up going and writing a WebSockets framework for Flask. And so I contribute in ways like that. And I go and I speak at conferences, and I'm a good steward of the community. So what I naturally do is I'm naturally involved in the community anyway. It's my hobby. So that's kind of my job as well. So that's kind of why I'm able to do so many things at the same time, is because half of my job is what I would like to do in my free time anyway. And then the other half, then I have a lot of free time after I'm done working to go out and take pictures and do all this stuff, make music. And I work from home as well, so that frees up a lot of time. So I can go take a break in the middle of the day and go take a few pictures, and that helps me relax and helps me be a better worker, basically.
That's pretty cool, and I really do enjoy looking at your pictures because not only they bring a different angle, I guess, so it's not your typical picture that you see on Instagram, but I also like to see where you are, which is pretty cool. It looks like you travel a lot.
I used to travel a whole lot, and I haven't been doing it lately. I've only traveled 2 or 3 times this year. It used to be 2 to 4 times a month. So I'm staying at home a lot more, and I'm enjoying that. But I'm going to start. I just got a talk accepted at Tennessee, so I'm going to be there if I can, and I'm going to start going to more conferences. I'll be at PyCon, of course. I'm always at PyCon. So we'll see. I'm planning on traveling more than I did in the last year.
Cool. And I guess this wouldn't be a podcast with you if we didn't talk about Python requests, which is, I guess, what you are most famous for, the project you're most famous for. So can you tell us a little bit about how it all got started and where you headed with this project?
So back in the day, I was really heavily invested in Python, and then there was this really cool service that came out called Convor, and it was kind of like a replacement for IRC in a way, where there were all these public chat rooms that people could talk to people on, and people could star messages if they were really good. So I would go in there into the Python room where there was a bunch of Python people, and I got to get to know everybody, because everyone had avatars and they had little faces, and it was really easy to get to know people. And so I kind of established myself in the Python community on Convor, and that was really great. So whenever I made a new little library, because I was always making little libraries, I wanted to be like Armin Ronacher. It was my goal. It was like I wanted to have that many stars on GitHub, and that many followers, and so that was my goal. And then I just kept making all these little libraries, and they were really useful. And some of them had I had one project that had like 200, 300 stars, and I was really proud of that. And it was called Tablib, and it's still around. It was like a tabular data structure. It's kind of like Pandas, but without the data science, basically. Just for converting tabular data sets back and forth for generating reports. And it's, anyway, tangent. To keep it short, Convor had an API. So I went out to build an API wrapper for Convor. And as soon as I started doing that, one of the files I created inside of the project was requests.py. So, because I wanted to abstract all that out, all the HTTP request stuff into its own module inside. And then I was like, oh, well, this should be its own module, because I'm making HTTP2, URLib2 is terrible. And I didn't know that before because I had never used it. And so I started looking up how to do all this stuff, like how to do basic authentication over SSL, and how to do this and how to do that. And I'm like, this stuff is crazy. And so I took it out into its own library, and I started like working on that, and making it so it could do everything I could ever want it to do. And that way I would never have to solve that problem again, because I was planning on writing API wrappers for a bunch of services. And then, much to my surprise, people started using it. And they started using it way more than they ever used any of my other projects, and they started contributing. Someone added cookie support. I'm like, oh, that's not something I would have thought of. And they added a bunch of stuff, and I had to be really careful in what I accepted and didn't accept. And it was the first project that really took off on its own, and it was an accident. And it was really great because, I'm really thankful for that, because it was my goal to do that, but I was never expecting it to be that project at all. I never could have done that on purpose. So I'm very thankful for the amount of attention that it's gotten, and that it's so useful to so many people, because that's the most valuable thing in my life, is the love that request gets. It really, I want to be very impactful, and I feel like I've been successful in being very impactful on the world by making requests. So I'm very, very happy that people get to use it and save a lot of time.
I have to tell you that the world is a much better place because of Python requests, so thank you.
Thank you very much for using it.
Yeah, we actually use it in order to test our APIs, so that's make the life very, very easy.
I should say the funny thing is I never actually finished that API wrapper for Convor, and I never wrote I've written like one or two API wrappers since then. But my original goal was to just write requests so that I could write a bunch of API wrappers for all my favorite services, and I never ended up doing that because I got too busy.
Yeah, so since we are talking about Python and recently heard some polemic opinions about Python 3, we want to know yours. And are you happy with Python 3?
My opinions have changed over the years. I do not like Python 3 personally, but I have accepted that it's the future of Python and that I have to use it. and that's okay. There's some things that I don't like. I like the way strings worked in 2 better, and I think that they could have fixed it in a better way. I think they could have removed implicit encoding and just raised an error when that happens and kept the types the way they were. And it would have solved a lot of the problems that they were solving by switching the types around. I also don't like how byte strings work in 3. Everything's a little bit more abstract and a bit more computer sciencey. It makes it a little. I think it'd be harder to learn 3 than it would be to learn 2. It feels a little bit more like a science project. But if you're starting a new project today, my opinion is that you should be writing it in 3 without question, and there's no excuse not to. The community is ready for 3. It's stable. It's production ready. I don't think I think that we could have done things a lot smoother than we did, but it doesn't matter. We're here. This is the future. And, I just started a new project called saythanks.io, and I wrote it in 3, and I couldn't even tell the difference. So if the library maintainers do all the hard work for you of making their stuff run on 3, like I did when I did requests, when I added 3 support to requests, which was extremely difficult, then if all the libraries do that, and most of them have, then you don't even really notice a difference. And then you get a bunch of nice new features from 3. So, but if you are writing libraries, it is harder because you have to support 2 and 3 at the same time. And that makes things a little complicated. But over the course of the next 3 years, I think it'll be acceptable to publish libraries that only support 3. And I think that that'll be a new pattern that we're going to start seeing a lot more of over the next 3 years. And I think that that'll be the new standard.
Yeah, I like what you said, that in 3 years that reality will change, because currently we know that people almost argue against strings and then argue against the compatibility.
I forgot about the thing I hate the most. Yeah. The thing I hate the print statement. I love the print statement. I love because I debug with the print statement. I just type print, and then that drives me crazy. It's not easy to remember. You have to put the parentheses there. Yeah. Oh, that's the thing. Honestly, that's my biggest complaints.
Yeah. Staying with Python, continuing on the subject of Python, I know that you are not very happy with packaging, and you are not very happy with the way we are defining our requirements file. So you have a meta project. You aim to change that way, and can you speak?
It's not that I'm not happy with the way things are. It's just that things could be better. Yes. I think that we're doing things very well, actually, compared to a lot of languages. I just think that we can learn from the other languages as well, because they're doing one thing in particular right that we're not. And if you look at Ruby, for example, their standard for packaging is they have a gem file and then a gemfile.lock. And what happens is in gemfile, you just say the things that you want to install for, like, say, your web application. And then in the lock file, it generates this lock file that contains all the dependencies, all the sub-dependencies, and all the explicit versions that are going to be installed. And then you commit that into your repository so that everyone who ever deploys the application always has an exact set of the dependencies. Now, the problem today, so it's a deterministic build. It's very important that your builds are deterministic. The problem today is we have requirements.txt, and it's kind of a hack, and it works very well, and it functions as either of those files. You can either specify just really lazily, I want Flask and Unicorn, and that's it. Or you can say, I want Flask version 0.0.8, and I want all of its dependencies and all their versions, and I want Unicorn at this exact version. And that's the way you're supposed to use it when you're deploying web applications, is you want it to be deterministic. But no one wants to use it that way. They want to use it the easy way. And so there needs to be two separate files. So I have a pattern that I use where I have a requirements file, and then I have a requirements to freeze file, where requirements to freeze is where I put the stuff that I want to pip install, and then I freeze to requirements.txt. Now, the better solution is to actually have pip support a new standard, and this is called pip file, and I'm working with Donald Stuft on this. This is one of his brainchild ideas that I'm trying to help come to fruition. And the idea is, it's a working document. Right now it's just a README that describes the functionality and what it'll do. You can see it on GitHub at PyPA, that's the Python Packaging Authority / pip file is the name of the project. And the idea is that pip will gain the functionality of supporting a new type of file. And right now, this may change the name of the file, right now it's called a pip file and a pipfile.lock. And a pip file will contain, basically you just say, I want requests and I want Django greater than 1.10. Right, and then maybe I want a dev package for nose for dev dependencies, and then it'll generate from that a lock file which contains all the information of all the dependencies and the exact versions and the hashes of all the other versions, so that you get all the security features of pip. And
so you have to regenerate that file every time you want to deploy the application, or you can just generate you compile your file, your requirements file, and deploy it, or the idea is to regenerate it on runtime?
The idea is that it will be committed into source code and it'll be generated for you.
Got it. I like that idea very much, because sometimes we are limited using just that comparison on operations on requirements file, and sometimes I really think we can do better. We can have other conditionals in there. So
and it'll also probably have the functionality of you being able to specify. There's this thing called PEP 508, which specifies different environment markers, they're called. So you'll be able to say optionally that this requires the platform of Windows, so that the installation will abort if it's not running on Windows, for example. And you could also say that it requires a Python version 360b1, for example. Or more normally, you would say requires Python 2.7 or requires Python 3, because that's important information, right? Yeah,
very nice.
And the idea is that it won't install Python. It will just if the file specifies that it requires Python 2.7 and you're installing this in 3, it'll raise an error and it'll stop because you're not running in the right environment.
Yeah. So you have some. Do you know when it will be ready? Do you have some? Yeah.
No, not yet. I'm listening to a lot of community feedback. One of the best ones so far is they don't want to call it pipfile and pipfile.lock. I like those names. The best suggestion that I've come up because that's kind of like an anti-pattern. The suggestion has been that we should rely on file extensions. So that was by Glyph, and I like to listen to what Glyph has to say. He's a very smart man. So he didn't come up with any good suggestions, but someone else in the thread did. They said that maybe we should call it requirements.pip and requirements.piplock. And I think that might be a really good naming convention for the files, quite possibly. So I might call it that. So I'm collecting that feedback before I go to implement the API. And then the API, once it kind of works, will be a library that then pip can basically put into itself as a trial and see if it works. And then once it works, then they're going to build it into a robust, it'll be a prototype. And then they'll build it into a robust thing that's part of pip itself, and it'll be built in and it'll work. And so I wouldn't expect it to be in pip within the next 6 months, but I don't know. It depends on how much I'm working on it, basically. So I am spending Heroku time working on this. It's not my top priority, but it's one of those things where I'm taking my time to make sure that I'm doing it right before I do the work. Like, for example, they wanted to have groups so that you could have, like, if you look at gem files, you can have any groups. You could have dev, production, staging.
It's very nice. We have this on RPMs. When we have a Red Hat repository, we can have groups there, and we can just install a development group and have everything in a bunch. That is a really cool thing to have.
The bad thing about that, though, is that there's no standard naming conventions around them. So people could name them whatever they want, and it gets really confusing really quickly. So I looked at the composer community, which is what PHP uses, and they did it the right way, in my opinion, and I want to emulate that, which is there's only two options. You have default and you have dev, and that's it. That's the only options there are. And so at first, that's what it's going to be. And that really constrains what you can do. And I think that and they've done that for 2 or 3 years, and no one has complained that that's not enough. So I think that it's a great decision to just stick to dev package and dev package, basically. And then the underlying lock file has the infrastructure to add other groups later if we decide to add that in, but at first it will only have those two. And that'll be I think that'll be a really good decision to limit that. So those are the type of things I'm trying to get right before I go and build it.
Nice, thank you. This will change the way we use Python, because one of the things I hate the most is the way we do requiremented packaging. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad to help. Donald's stuff started this, and I'm just taking it and trying to help him finish it, basically. So I'm owning it right now, and then I'm collaborating with him, and you have to thank him as well, because he definitely did. This wouldn't be possible without him.
Fantastic. I guess I'm going to be the one now to break up the conversation about Python and switch gears a little bit and talk about something which it seems to me that you are just as passionate about, which is music, specifically your music, the one that you've been producing and publishing out there. So one of the things that I learned was that you have just recently released an album called Unmastered Impulses.
Yes.
And it contains, I'm going to quote here, 13 tracks inspired by esoteric, spiritual, and philosophical concepts, explorations into the dream state, bipolar disorder, and a traumatic relationship. So that's quite a mouthful there. It's a lot of different themes in there. So can you tell us, and I mean, I guess I'm going to have several little questions. I'm going to try to keep it in order here, but tell us a little bit about your passion for music, and then tell us how that led into this album.
So I was always a musician growing up. In fourth grade, I started playing. So I guess when I was 9 years old, I started playing the drums, snare drum, and I got very good at it very quickly. And I continued playing until I was 18 years old. And I still play. I don't play the drum kit anymore. I studied jazz drumming for a while. And I was really into rock drumming and funk and stuff like that on the drum kit. And then I experimented with electronic music with FL Studio when I was like in my late teens. Someone I worked with at McDonald's showed me FL Studio, so I learned how to do that, and I thought that was really fun. I took a break from music when I got into computers, and so I kind of established myself as a programmer. And I sold all my stuff I still have my drum set, but that was the only thing I didn't sell. And I sold my camera. I was into photography then too. I sold everything so I could focus on just programming, and that was my only hobby. And then once I established myself and had a good job, then I bought a camera, and then I started buying synthesizers in Ableton, and I started making music. And I do that in my free time quite a bit. So I love analog synthesizers, and I love making music. It's really fun, and it's a good way to relax, and it's a very therapeutic as well. So it's a very like exploratory thing where it's like I'm just going to try to make a song about how I feel right now. Usually is what it is. And so it's kind of like a journal. My SoundCloud is like a journal of all these different emotional things. And I can remember what was going on at the time when I wrote the song. And that album in particular is called Unmastered Impulses for two reasons. One, none of those songs are mastered. So I called it Unmastered Impulses. They sound great, but they're not, from a technical perspective, mastered properly. Because I wrote them all very loud. And if you talk to an audio engineer, they would say that it's not well mastered. But it doesn't matter to me. It sounds great. Two, though, unmastered impulses, I have ADD and I have bipolar disorder, and that was something that I've just found out about in the last year and a half or so. And both of those have this component of them where they are, you have a high amount of impulsivity, and you have poor impulse control. So, especially in that relationship that I referenced in the album description, I exhibited a significant amount of impulsiveness, and it was like a big thrill to go and be really impulsive all the time. So that album is kind of like me not learning is kind of like a journey through me being really impulsive and not mastering that part of myself yet. And it's kind of taking you through the journey of all the different things that I experimented with and the different emotions that I experienced.
Yeah, I see your album has a nice picture on cover. It's your picture? You are the photographer? Yes, oh, nice.
Yes, that's at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. I was at a Python conference. It was a polyglot conference. I can't remember the name of it. It was like DevCon Tel Aviv or something. And we visited the church in Jerusalem there, and I got that picture. It's a Ethiopian boy praying at the temple, and then there's someone walking in front of him. So I had to hold the camera very still, and it's like a ghost. And then I put some symbols on top of it and stuff to make it look. I like symbology quite a bit, so I added some symbols to make it a bit more me.
Yeah, good work. Very nice cover.
Thank you very much.
I have to say that you just stole my question. That was the thing that I wanted to know. What was the symbolism behind the cover, the artwork there?
Well, so if you look at the bottom right, there's this the caduceus. It's kind of hard to see,
I see
but there's the caduceus, and that's a symbol that I follow a lot in life. It's kind of like my main symbol. And I just recently I have a tattoo. It's actually an image of my tattoo that I have on my right arm, but it's kind of faded out and you can't see it very well on the album. I kind of wanted to make it really subtle that it was there. But if you go to the request documentation now, I just switched the logo over last week to my tattoo. So if you go to pythonrequest.org, the logo is my tattoo, and that's kind of like my symbol of it's my favorite tattoo. So that I designed for myself, and it's the symbol that represents basically everything to me. One of my spiritual phrases that I came up with is go in both directions at the same time. And that symbol encompasses that, and it's about there are these two snakes that are in eternal conflict, and then the staff comes down and brings comfort and peace between them, and that's kind of like a pattern in life that you have. So I see that symbol in everything that goes on in life, basically, this or what it represents. So yeah.
Reading your blog posts, and if you're actually, I was listening to your album, and I can totally see how some of these tracks would be the perfect soundtrack to the things that you're actually saying. And I don't know if they were designed that way. Were they written with that intent, or?
Yes. Yeah. So there was about a period of a year when I was in a relationship with someone, and I was extremely manic, where I was undiagnosed, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And mania means that you're very impulsive. You're very easily excited. I was having a lot of delusional thinking, a lot of metaphysical and esoteric thinking that was very real to me. And so I was writing music during that time. And so those songs were written literally while I was experiencing those things. So they touched very close to the subject.
Well, I have to say I really enjoyed it, and listening to your music, and as I was preparing for this podcast, I was going through some of your posts, and I could totally listen to the music. It sounded like it was a perfect soundtrack for them.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, really, really cool. And I have one final question about this topic, which is, how many synthesizers do you have?
I've reduced the size. I used to have more. I have a Moog Sub 37, which is one of my favorites. It's surprisingly cheap. It's $1,500 or $1,400, and for a Moog, that is very inexpensive. And it sounds like, I used to have a Moog Voyager, and I think it was $3,000. And I would expect the synthesizer to cost $3,000, but it's not. It's half that price, and it's a great synthesizer. I have Korg Volca keys, which is only like $200 or $300. It's really, really tiny, and it's an analog synthesizer. I have a Micro Brute by Arturia, and I used to have a Mini Brute, but it broke. And then I have a Korg. What's it called? It's the little mini. They have a mini synthesizer, the Micro Korg, that I use, and that's a digital synthesizer. But it does analog modeling, where it pretends that it's analog through digital processing. And that was my first synthesizer I ever had, and then I gave it to someone, and then I just recently acquired another one, and I really enjoy using it. So. And then I have a TR8, which is a modern digital emulation by Roland of the classic 808 and 909 drum machines. So it has like the completely authentic sound from Roland, what they're known for. And the 808 and the 909 are classic drum machines. You can buy them online for $2,000, but the 808 is only like $250. So I got the digital version, instead, and it's I use that on a lot of my tracks now too. And so all that fits like in just a corner of my desk. They're kind of stacked on top of each other, and it all works pretty well. And I used to have a lot more synthesizers. I used to have a Teenage Engineering OP1. I also have a Korg Electribe, which I really like. It's a little jam box, so I don't need a computer. I can just sit down with this little thing and make loops all by myself, which I really enjoy. And so that should give you a good idea. And I used to have a modular synthesizer, which is one of those things you have, like with servers, you have like 2 and 3U servers or 4U servers. They have another size called H. I think it's H or HP. I can't remember, but it's a little micro rack, and you can fit these little synthesizer modules on these little racks, and you buy them individually, and they're like $50 to $1,000 each, and you make your own synthesizer from all these little parts, and you plug in the chords like you're a telephone operator. And I used to be really into that, but I don't have that one anymore. I kind of sold a lot of my stuff when I was manic because I thought I had too many things.
Yeah, one thing I think worth mentioning is that sometimes you do some live streams on Facebook when we can see you playing your synthesizers and your composition process. Are you doing that regularly? every week? How can we see?
Yeah, if you add me on Facebook or follow me on Facebook, you will get notifications. I only try to be friends with people that I know, but if you reach out to me and chat with me, I'll talk to you, and then I'll probably add you, and then you'll see them. And I do it sometimes every day, and sometimes I'll take a week off and not do it, but it's generally at least 2 or 3 times a week. I'll do that for an hour or two. I rarely make music anymore without streaming. I find it really fun to have people watch.
Yeah, I watch it sometimes. I remember one day that I was watching, and I asked you if you were playing flute, and you said, no, it's an electronic cigar. It's not a flute. I was watching and thinking you were playing a small flute or some kind of small instrument, but wasn't electronic cigar.
That was probably the vocal keys. It can sound like a flute sometimes.
Yeah.
It's ring modulation.
Fantastic. This is really cool. Thank you for sharing all this information. And I guess we gotten to the point in our podcast where we try to finish things up by talking about your top 5. And this is basically inspired on the movie, the book. Actually, I recommend the book, High Fidelity. And we would like to basically get your top 5 around books. So we're going to start with books. Then we're going to move on to music and probably wrap it up around movies. So what would be your top 5 for books?
Right now I'm reading a book that I haven't read the whole thing yet, but it is called Hermetica, and I find it very fascinating. It is kind of like a meta-religious book, but it's a work by Hermes, the guy behind that the Caduceus is associated with. And we don't know if Hermes is one person or if it was 1,000 people all using the same name like they used to do in ancient times. Uh-huh. But it's this book where it kind of describes the mechanics of the mechanics behind the different religions. So it instead of so imagine that Christianity is an object, and that Islam is an object, right? They would be instances of a base class, and the base class would be Hermeticism, and this is the book that describes Hermeticism. So it's really interesting to read because it doesn't conflict with any of them. It kind of brings them all together into one conclusive piece of philosophy. So, and it's very scientific. Sir Isaac Newton was a really big reader of Hermetica, and it used to be a pretty common thing that people studied, and it's kind of lost now. People don't really know about it as much. Mm-hmm. So I find that alone fascinating. Like just 200 years ago, it was everyone knew about it, and now people don't. So I just started reading it, and I find it absolutely fascinating to read. So yeah, there's that. Other books like that, like I said, I like the esoteric stuff. There's a book called The Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley that I'm really into right now. It describes my kind of philosophical view of the world very well, which is basically, that's where do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, do what thou wilt under love comes from. And it's a weird book. It has some weird stuff in it. But it's one of those things where you can use new literary criticism to analyze it however you wish. It even says to do that. So that's a book I recommend people look into. Other books, there's Godel Auscherbach, which I haven't read at all, but it's one of those books that I know that I love it, even though I haven't read it. I actually just loaned it to a friend today to read, and I hope that he reads it. But it's one of those. It's just so hard to approach. I don't read much, and along with the Hermetica book, there's one called the Calibrian. I think is how you pronounce it, and it's a very short book that kind of gives you the bullet points of Hermeticism. And I'm really interested in Hermeticism right now because like I said, I'm interested in esoteric things, spiritual belief systems, but I'm not religious. So I think that's kind of interesting to me. There's Be Here Now, which is a classic from the 70s, from the psychedelic revolution. It's by Ram Dass. And that one describes it kind of brings together a lot of different religious ideas from the East and kind of combines it with ideas from the West. And I don't necessarily think that it should be treated as gospel or anything, but it's definitely a good book to read to get an idea of like what the people who are into like the free love movement and like that type of thing are where they're coming from, because it really describes like New Ageism pretty well. It's kind of like the New Age Bible, basically. And I'm not into New Ageism anymore. I was, but it's a good book. There's another book called Jnana Yoga. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name, but it's Jnana. And there's three main types of yoga and the types of yoga that you actually study or go to a yoga class for are only a specific type of yoga involving the body. But if you actually study the principles of yoga itself from India, there's three main branches of it, and they're jhana, bhakti, and karma. Jhana is the yoga of knowledge, bhakti is the yoga of love, and karma is the yoga of living your daily life. So those are the three yogas that I practice, if you will, which just means I'm an old person who lives a normal life. But the book called Jnana Yoga is another one of those books that kind of describes how things work, and it has a lot of really interesting ideas in it. And it's from the Eastern perspective, and that's one of my most interesting books, I think. And I'll add one more. I think that might have been 4. I haven't read much in a couple years, but Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a definite favorite by far. Like that, but that's a given. And the whole trilogy, a trilogy of 5 books. The one I was thinking of is called Einstein's Dreams. It's a short book, and each chapter is another world where time works differently. So in one chapter, time moves slower the higher altitude you are. So everyone wants to live in this expensive real estate at the top of mountains, so that they live long lives and stuff like that. So it's a really cool book. I think it's one of my favorites. So yeah, that's my book list.
That's pretty impressive, and I have to say that I was not really familiar with the term Hermetica, but as a coincidence, I guess, I've always wanted to read Isaac Newton's biography, and there are some out there. So I may get to these books, these biographies. I may hear about a little bit more about this term.
Yeah, he did a lot of work with alchemy, and it was really interesting because alchemy is actually about spirituality. It was illegal at the time when they were writing about alchemy to write about like spiritual things that weren't like about Caesar or about whoever was in charge, So they had to disguise it like they were trying to make gold, or they were trying to make the Philosopher's Stone and all these other things. And really they're just symbols that represent different parts of the mind and the body and how to transform them and transform yourself into a better person. So that's what the study of alchemy is actually about. And it's really cool. So Sir Isaac Newton was an alchemist, for example. And so he studied alchemy. And that was a big part of his studies into the universe, and how he came to the conclusions about gravity and stuff was through reading about that stuff. And principles like as above, so below, that's also from Hermetica. There's a lot of things that are quoted in the Bible that are also from Hermetica as well. So it's kind of like, it's like a meta religion type of a thing. And it's really early for me. I've only been into it for like a month or two, but I think it's kind of like my Bible, maybe. I'm not sure. We'll see. I always, I'm dipping in slowly, but it seems to be really cool.
All right, so change a little bit the subject. We talked about books. What about music? And I think you can also point your own music here. So what is your top 5 list of music?
My top 5 list of music, my favorite song of all time is Lateralist by Tool. I think it's one of the best musically it's one of the best songs, and also lyrically it's one of the best songs, and also metaphorically it's one of the best songs. It really describes the things that I've struggled with about being manic, because it's all about spiraling out and trying to embrace our divinity while still being human at the same time. And it has the Fibonacci sequence encoded in the syllables of the verses, for example. It's a very beautiful, and it's a beautiful, beautiful song, and it gives me chills every time I listen to it. And it's the only song I know that does that. That whole album is fantastic, and it has great art by Alex Gray, who's a great artist. And but that song in particular is just utterly fantastic. Other songs like that, Kanye West. I love everything by Kanye. I think that he is absolutely an incredible artist. I think he has some mental health issues, but I know he's very controversial. But I'm a massive, massive Kanye fan of his music. I feel like I can really identify a lot with his music. Other people I really like. I listen to a lot of hip hop nowadays, and I'm trying to think of other like rock. One of my all-time favorite albums, the best recorded album of all time, is Rage Against the Machine by Rage Against the Machine. If you're into audio fidelity and like high quality recordings, that is considered to be the best recorded album of all time. Like the quality of the recording itself. The album that probably had the biggest impact on me as when I was growing up was Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park. That had a lot of emotional resonance with me in like 8th grade, a lot of anguish and emo, feelings, and all those songs are still really good. And then the band that changed my life forever was called 311. And I love their music. They're very positive. They're all about positivity. And I was very depressed in high school, and then I found their music, and it changed my life completely. So yeah, I think.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about movies, and I have to mention that you also made some soundtracks for some short movies. I have the chance to watch one called The Fine Valentines, which has a nice music. And so we want to know which movies do you like the most, the movies that are important for you. You can also put some music if you have some soundtrack, your preferred soundtrack or your preferred music.
This one's a little harder for me. Let me think. So The Matrix and that whole series is excellent, of course. And there's also an accompanying movie called The Dark City, which is basically the same exact story, and they came out at the same time, and they were filmed on some of the same sets. So if you're into The Matrix, check out The Dark City. It's a little bit less computer oriented and a little more like Secret Society oriented, but it's a great movie. Much lower budget. I just saw the movie Doctor Strange, and that is probably my favorite superhero movie I've seen so far. It's still in theaters, but it was fantastic. I really, really, really liked it. So that's like a movie that's out right now. I also saw Arrival, and that was another incredible movie that's really hard to parse because it has a very jagged storyline that you can interpret in multiple ways. And I think that was one of the better films I've seen in a while. I'm trying to think of other classics. Anchorman is one of my all-time favorite movies, along with like Tropic Thunder and those comedies. Anchorman, I think, is by far my favorite. Talladega Nights, Walk Hard, those type of movies. I really enjoy, those ones are just hilarious, and I love those films. And then on a more serious note, one of my favorite films is called Waking Life, and I used to be into lucid dreaming a lot and kind of exploring the ideas of dreams and like life being like another dream kind of. And it's a movie about that, basically. It's animated where they take and it has a lot of deep philosophy, little clips in it and stuff. And it's a really excellent film. I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in philosophy or dreaming and stuff like that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I sometimes have some lucid dreams, and I watched that movie.
Do you like it?
Very nice movie. Yeah, very much.
It's trippy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, childhood movies, I really like those. I want to watch the movie Hercules this week. I've been wanting to see that. And, those old ones like The Prince of Egypt. And, I have a lot of childhood movies that are really still really good for me. Like the soundtrack from The Prince of Egypt, I think, is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in my life. It's incredible. And that's the story of the Exodus story, from the Bible. And it's just such a good film. And when they animated the parting of the Red Sea in that film, it was the world record for the most man hours put into a single scene of all time. I don't know if that's still true or not, but at the time it was ridiculous. It was like 10 million man hours or something absurd put it into the showing of that scene. So it was a very powerful movie when it came out for me, and I still like it quite a bit.
Wow, that I never actually paid much attention to Prince of Egypt, but I think now I'm going to have to watch it again just to see that scene. I don't think I'll.
And it's funny. It's a funny movie too. It's a great thing. It has comedy and it's dramatic and it's real. Well, it's real myth story, and it has. I don't know. It's a good balance of all those things.
Cool. Well, I guess this brings us to the end of this episode. I think I speak for everyone here that it's been very, very nice talking to you. And if it were up to us, I think we'll continue talking and asking more questions. But I want to thank you so much, Kenneth, for taking the time to not only talking to us for so long, but also answering all of our questions. And I'm very, very much thankful for this.
Definitely. I'm very thankful that you had me and that this podcast exists. There needs to be more Python podcasts out there.
Yeah, so thank you so much. We now have a lot of good music to listen, and also I have a lot of good movies to watch. So I'll have a nice week. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
And so for everyone still listening to us, I want to thank you for your time. And please let us know if you like this episode. We usually don't really do a lot of episodes in English, but if you enjoyed this, give us some feedback, and we'll be more than happy to bring more episodes in English. And with that, thank you so much, and until the next time, signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ain't gonna give nobody none of my jelly rolls. I wouldn't give you a piece of this cake to save your soul. Come on, man. My mom told me today, before she went away, to be a good boy, she'd bring me a toy. I'm my mama's pride and joy. Now there ain't no use for you to keep on hanging round. I love you, but I've got to let you down. My jelly roll is sweet.